All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. In just a second, you should be able to see the presentation on my screen. My name is Sara Espinosa. I am the Manager for Training and Development at ISAC. I will be presenting today on, hopefully you're in the right place, but we are doing our Spring into Action for FAFSA completion webinars. Now, I will preface there are a lot of conversations going on right now about FAFSA and how to support our students. I do want to make it clear that I'm not focusing on FAFSA completion just for the sake of FAFSA completion, right? I think what's worrisome, and that I'm sure as practitioners you all know, is FAFSA completion means a lot more for students, especially students who are first generation, who are low income, who don't know that there are supports and resources and financial aid available to help them pay for college, which is, that's what the concerning part of this is, that if students don't know or students are not completing a FAFSA, can we really be certain that they've been presented or that they've come across all of their options? So as I get started, you should be able to see my screen, hopefully. Give me 1 second. Megan, are you able to see my screen?
You could, and then you took it away.
But you were able to see the PowerPoint because mine just shows a black screen.
Oh, it showed a black screen.
Okay. All right. Give me 1 second. Let me reopen. Tried opening it a different way just so that you could get it up and running. But like I said, my name is Sara Espinosa. I'm Manager for Professional Development at ISAC. Before we get started, just so you know, we are recording the webinar. It will be shared on our website, just like all of our webinars are. We'll share them on the on-demand portion of our website under the Professional Development page. If you have any issues with your audio throughout the session, just know that you can switch from the computer audio or device audio to the call me option, which will it will prompt you to enter a phone number, or you can call the number on the screen. But if you enter your phone number, it's a little quicker, and then the system from WebEx will give you a call to connect the audio via the phone. You can, throughout this session, ask questions using the Q&A feature located on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. You should be able to see a question mark there and access the Q&A option there. This way, this will ensure that any of the panelists on here, which are other members of the professional development team, will also see your questions and you'll get a quicker response. And then we do offer additional webinars that can be found on our website, as well as continuing and professional development hours for this webinar and any webinar that we offer to the general public. And you'll get details on how to request those at the end of the presentation. All right, so I'm going to go right into it. And this is where we currently stand as of this week. This is updated to reflect where our completion rates were on Monday, and I'll highlight why this is important. So if you are familiar with NCAN, NCAN is the National College Attainment Network. They have their own FAFSA tracker. They have a FAFSA tracker on their website. I think on Monday Illinois was ranked 5th as far as FAFSA completion across the country with 40.2% completion. Now, if you rely on NCAN, it's a really good resource. However, it's important to note that the numbers on NCAN do not include alternative applications. So the numbers that I am using on this slide are specific to Illinois and do include our ALTAP. So when I say FAFSA completion, that also includes alternative applications. And as of last week, we had about 1,600 alternative applications submitted, which would fall into this FAFSA category. So we have 53% of the graduating of students in Illinois who have completed a FAFSA or ALTAP. We have 6% of students that have completed a non-participation form or opt-out waiver. And then we have 41% of students who have done neither. And so this is where the focus for FAFSA completion comes from. It's not just for the sake of completing. It's not specifically because of the graduation requirement. It's because we want to make sure that we figure out what's going on with the other 41% of our students. What's their plan post-graduation? Do they need help? Are they still stuck trying to complete the FAFSA? Is there an error on their application? Did they forget and never came back to submit it, which is not uncommon? We also have a lot more students this year who completed the wrong application, and so we've been targeting those students as well. So, I mean, students are pretty used to now having the FAFSA available on October 1st. And so if any of our students logged into the FAFSA website on October 1st, they might have thought that the 23-24 FAFSA was the one that they should have, that they were supposed to complete, right? So we are seeing that we have a lot more students this year compared to other years who completed the wrong FAFSA. And that's likely because the FAFSA was not available until January of this year. So we could have a number of those students fitting into this category, but I wanted to set the stage and sort of use this to explain why we're focusing on this. I'm sure as practitioners working with students, you all are very aware of all the issues that have happened or have occurred and continue to occur with the FAFSA. And so we need to figure out how to best support the students who are still in that 41% so that we know what their plan is, or we have a way to reach them to support them even after graduation. And so that is one thing that I will encourage you to keep in mind as we go through this presentation, is to keep track of those students. If you have students that have not completed either, we can support them after graduation, right? Like, we know schools are out for the summer. We can support students, we can provide resources, we can answer their questions. We just don't want those students falling through the cracks. So as far as completion numbers, you can also see this information, just general completion rates by school on our website and our FAFSA financial aid application completion performance metrics page. It's a mouthful, but it's basically where we have the FAFSA completion rates for all the schools in Illinois. You can see that on our website. It's public information. This year we added an additional column for the opt-out form. So you'll see for each school what percentage of their graduating class submitted an opt-out form, and then how many submitted FAFSAs. And again, for us, FAFSA means FAFSA and alternative app. So that total should be 82, or should be 100%. You can see for this school, for example, you have 0% of students completed an opt-out form, 82% of students completed a FAFSA, but then you still have 18% of students unaccounted for, which would be students that fall into that red portion of the pie chart from the last slide. Then you have this school, 3% opt-out, 57% FAFSA completion. That's 60% of students total, but we have 40% of their students unaccounted for. So that gives you an idea of, by school, what percentage of your students has neither, right? And so this will help not only with comparing FAFSA completion rates, but more to see, okay, well, other schools maybe in my area or my district, they have more or less students unaccounted for. Maybe ask, or maybe reach out, or maybe coordinate efforts to see, what's working for them, what's not working for me. How can we maybe, if we're all schools in the same district, can we manage to maybe have one more district-wide FAFSA completion or corrections workshop and try to spread out those efforts, because it is a lot for, especially depending on the school that you're in, you may or may not have additional staff. You might be the only counselor. So it's important to kind of reach out and partner up with other schools in your area, especially ones that maybe have higher completion rates, or vice versa. If you're doing something that's working for your students, you might want to share that with other schools who maybe are not being as successful with reaching those students, right? Like, you can share your best practices, you can share what options have worked for you, what times, what days, and to hopefully get a hold of those students that we still don't know what their plan is for the fall. On our end, we have our ISAC core. Specifically, the coordinators have access to GAP data, to data in our GAP access portal, which is a gift assistance program portal, where you would actually be able to see student level data for each of your students for FAFSA completion. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But the coordinators have access to that information. They're able to share it with the core members in their area to help target those schools with lower completion rates, especially schools who maybe had completion rates lower this year than they did last year, and maybe don't have a core member that has regular office hours, or if you don't have any events coming up, just figuring out a way to continue to offer supports to students post-graduation. And so this is what it looks like on our website, just so that you get an idea if you haven't seen this page before. If you go to the ISAC main page, you can navigate to it right from the home page, the financial aid application completion performance metrics. You'll be able to see all of the districts. You can sort them by any of these headers in the first row. So you'll be able to see that data, or you can, if you're looking for a specific school, you can use the search bar that's also provided there. Now, just to give you a little bit more information on, there's been a lot of changes, a lot of updates, a lot of issues with the FAFSA. And so this is where we are at right now. Starting mid-April, students were able to make corrections to the FAFSA. Parents who don't have a social were able to manually enter tax data while they were trying to still figure out FSA IDs. It would be just done through the student section. Then we found out there was also issues with some of the data that was already processed, right? Like the Department of Ed had shared that some of the data was either being lost when the students submitted. Hopefully my dogs are not super loud. There was issues with transferring the data from the IRS. So, there's a number of different issues. And yesterday there was also another update about reprocessing this information and getting that information back to the colleges. So there's a lot of changes. Right now, one thing that, if you're not aware, that happened this week, and I have it in here somewhere, but let me go over this. There's another update that happened this week that should hopefully provide some relief to families who are still stuck in the FSA ID creation process for parents without a social, but I'll get to that in just a second. So as you know, this is pretty much a domino effect, right? Like the issues with the FAFSA are not just issues with the FAFSA. The delays with the FAFSA, the issues that delays the ISERs that colleges need in order to package students, right? So right now, colleges have already received those ISERs. They're starting to, they receive now those, they're going to be receiving now those corrected ISERs. The Department of Ed has offered some flexibilities for colleges to be able to start packaging even before they get those corrected ISERs, right? They can still do that. But there's just a number of issues that our students, families, partners have encountered this year. And so everything has a ripple effect. Delayed FAFSA means delayed ISERs, which means, okay, colleges are in a waiting game. So once they get those corrections and direct data exchange issues figured out, then colleges can package students and send their financial aid offers. Then that also means, okay, students might have gotten offers, but they might need to go through the appeals or professional judgment process, which means, let's say if I had a unique situation that just came up after I filled out the FAFSA, or after that happened this year, since we're using taxes from a prior year, maybe financial circumstances have changed at home, maybe loss of income, maybe smaller or larger household size. Those are all things that you can't update on the FAFSA, which would require a student to go through this appeals and professional judgment process, which is another step before students can actually, a lot of students might not be comfortable making a decision or committing to a school without a package, because that's what we've been encouraging them to do for many years, right? We always tell them, don't blindly accept an offer to a school if you don't know how much financial aid they're providing. And so right now, a lot of students are in a panic, a lot of families are worried, a lot of parents are super concerned. I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it at workshops starting in January. Parents who, like frustrated, borderline in tears because, hey, we've been trying since January 2nd or January 3rd, when we were able to actually log in to the application during the soft launch period. And it's now January 30th and we still can't get an FSA ID. And so there's been just a number of issues. And so some of our students, I have a student who actually has been trying since January 3rd, just had her dad's FSA ID, like identity verified last week. And so it was a tedious process. And if the student didn't have like the determination to keep going through that process, I don't know that she would have been successful through it, right? Like, just because it's been such a hard process for her. And granted, she's in a different space because she's a current college student already. So she's navigated the FAFSA before at least, but even then, this wasn't the experience that she had last year. So there's a lot that I know practitioners were going through and a lot of frustration, but keep in mind, like, so are students and parents, and a lot of times they don't understand. They think that they did something wrong, or they're just frustrated that they're going to lose out on grants and scholarships and stuff like that. And so what the best that we can do right now is continue to support them through that process to try to help them navigate through completion all the way through their decision. And I mean, sometimes one of the things that is necessary, especially this year, is advocating for your students, making sure you reach out to partners, reach out to colleges, like, hey, this student has been trying, still hasn't been able to, or just was able to complete the FAFSA. Do you have any flexibilities? Can you, and most colleges are doing that. Like, everybody's on the same page as far as, everybody's going through these changes and issues and waiting game, but it never hurts to, give colleagues an additional reminder, if a deadline is coming up, that some of our students still have not been able to complete this process. Now, I was pretty excited this week. On Tuesday, there was an electronic announcement that was shared from Federal Student Aid in the afternoon. No, in the morning. It was right before, I think they shared it around 12:30 that day. And so it's a temporary flexibility that they're offering to allow contributors who still haven't been able to verify their identity to still use their FSA ID and still be able to access the FAFSA. So the biggest takeaways from that are listed here, and I'll go over them. I mean, it's pretty much what I mentioned, but contributors who cannot obtain an FSA ID through the what quote unquote normal process online, which would include the TransUnion identity verification questions, which I know a lot of our parents didn't get or weren't able to successfully answer, or not enough questions popped up. For those parents who were unable, or students who were unable to navigate that process and have to complete a validation of identity and attestation form, they will still need to complete that manual process, right? It doesn't mean that this flexibility no longer requires you to do that. It just means while that gets sorted out, because there's a lot of delays on their end in processing those, students and parents will not have to wait to use that FSA ID, so that username and password, to access and complete the FAFSA. Those individuals who are currently still waiting on the results of their identity validation process can start using their FSA ID. So this isn't just for people who are just now creating their FSA ID. It's for anybody who's been in that waiting game with the attestation form. They can now use their FSA ID to access the FAFSA. The department also indicated that they'd be notifying any of these individuals that didn't have identity verified yet, to notify them if they were affected by this change, right? To let them know that this was something that would be an option for them. There's a lot of, as much of a good news as I think this is for those families that have been stuck in this process for months now, there's also a lot of uncertainty that still needs to be clarified, what this means, right? Like, does this mean that if a student submits it without parents' validated identity, is this still considered submitted and complete? Is there going to be an SAI generated, or is there no SAI? There's still a lot of things we need answers for, but I think this is a big step. I mean, it's late in the game, but I think we'll take it. We'll take those little wins at this point, because whatever helps the students and parents be able to complete this process is it's helpful. So if you have any parents, students still waiting on this, which I have a few, and I made I sent some emails and text messages on Monday for this, please let them know that they don't have to wait for that. They still have to complete the process, so they shouldn't just disregard it, but it's not front and center. Right now, front and center is if they created it, or if they're creating an FSA ID, they can access the FAFSA and complete it. Now, for those students that were able to actually complete the FAFSA, they should get something this year called the FAFSA submission summary, which, for those of you that that are not new to the field, that have been working in the field before this year, was called the Student Aid Report. This is a document that summarizes the information that the student provided on their FAFSA. It has anything that any information about potential impacts to students' eligibility for federal student aid. Excuse me, it lets them know if there's any corrections that need to be made. So it's essentially the same thing as the SAR, it's just a different name this year. It's the FAFSA submission summary. It'll also include the students' SAI, which is the Student Aid Index, which was changed from EFC this year. So it contains a lot of helpful information, and students will get this once their initial FAFSA is processed. So there's a lot of things, especially right now, that I would encourage you to check in with your students on. So if you have a student that is marked as incomplete for FAFSA, I would follow up, make sure that they complete it, or that if they didn't want to complete it, that they know that because of the graduation requirement for those that are in Illinois public schools, they would have to complete a non-participation form or opt-out form or waiver. We use a lot of those interchangeably, but they would have to complete that in order to satisfy the graduation requirement. Now, by no means is the graduation requirement intended to keep the student from graduating. So just like the legislation said, there is what's been called up until this point, the good faith effort form that principals at the schools can complete on behalf of the student to say, hey, we tried, we reached out to the student or to the parents X amount of times. It's whatever you all consider were your efforts, good faith efforts to reach out to the student and help them with FAFSA or LTAP completion or non-participation form, and just documenting those efforts, right? So we have had that option on Gap Access. We've slightly changed it to make it a little bit easier right now because we know everybody's going through the issues because of FAFSA simplification. But just keep in mind with the FAFSA submission summary, once a student submits that, it's considered completely done. Like it's been submitted and it's been processed, but it will let you know if there are things that need to be looked at. For example, if you have a student that doesn't have an SAI, more than likely that indicates that the student either has to make a correction or has to follow up with the financial aid office. And so those are also things to look out for, not just eligibility, not just the number of the SAI, but if there's just no SAI or if there's any flags for corrections or verification, those are things to also look for. Students can access their FAFSA submission summary directly through their studentaid.gov account. They'll go to the My Activity page, and then under the FAFSA tracker, they'll be able to see that their application has been processed, and they should see this that says your FAFSA submission summary is ready. This is what the submission summary looks like this year. There's 4 tabs to go through. The first one is eligibility overview. This will include information on their student loans and work study. This is not a financial aid offer. This just shows eligibility for programs that are federally funded, so programs from the Department of Education. And all of this here is based on estimates, and it tells you on here it's based on full-time enrollment and the average cost of attendance. So it is not specific to the school. It is just it's a general picture for students to see if potential eligibility for programs. The next section is the SAI information. Students will be able to see their SAI. It has a brief definition of that and explains to the student what that is and what the range of SAIs, or the range for the SAIs. There's a tab that says next steps, which indicates or directs students to make corrections at this time, anything that they need to go back in and change. For example, if students entered manual tax data and they were able to, they have the ability to provide the consent on the form, they should do that. That will help reduce verification for students since it'll be transferred directly from the IRS. I know that's not available to all, including parents who don't have social security numbers. So in that case, I'd have to continue entering manual tax data. But anything else like adding additional schools or correcting your address or email or anything else that needs to be corrected on the form, again, corrected, not updated, we're not making changes to income or anything like that, can be done you following the steps in this tab. And then the last tab on here would be the FAFSA status tracker. This will show students, when they started their form, when they actually submitted it, when it was processed. If there was a correction, it'll have another date on here. Yeah, so the student submitted it January 2nd. It was processed January 2nd, which I think this is just a screen from the Department of Ed because I don't think I had any. There were no students that had a FAFSA process January 2nd. March 15th, the form was processed. Oh, that one says receive. Sorry, I misread that. And then March 15th is when they started releasing those ISERs. That's when this student's FAFSA was processed. And so that March 15th date is the last day of activity for this one. If they were to submit a correction, there would be some follow-up on here that would say, you know, you made a correction on this date and this is when it was processed. This will show you a little bit more of what to look for on there. So these are some of the things that you'll see. It'll tell you if your FAFSA is in draft mode, like if it's incomplete, which isn't uncommon even before this year. Sometimes we have students who think they've submitted the FAFSA, but really they save and exit because they forget that, like, oh, my mom wasn't here, I didn't have her date of birth, or I didn't have her social, or I didn't have her taxes, right? Like it's not uncommon to see students save and exit, and so this will let you know that your FAFSA is still in draft form and it's incomplete. If it's in progress, it means you provided your consent, approval, and signature, but it has not been submitted yet. If it shows in review, it means that it was submitted, but it hasn't yet been processed. If there's that yellow button with the little, I call it like a little warning sign, it tells you action is required and you're either missing consent or approval, which is what we've been seeing also for a lot of students. So it's not considered complete. It won't be processed until that step is completed. So if you're missing signatures, it's considered an incomplete FAFSA. It's not going to get processed until that gets added. You'll see the green check mark or the little green circle with the white check mark saying processed. Once everything you need is in there, it's submitted, it's processed, it's signed, everything. And then closed, which they've indicated they're not going to enforce right now because of all the issues. But normally your FAFSA would be deleted after 45 days of inactivity. Right now, we don't have any students that should be seeing that, but that would say closed. Your FAFSA form was never submitted and can no longer be submitted because the federal FAFSA deadline passed. To make changes, I went over this already, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it, but you can log into studentaid.gov using their the FSA ID for the student. If a student received a FAFSA submission summary by mail, they can make changes to it, send it in. I would hope this is not going to be super common for students, but I know we had some students that might have completed a paper FAFSA early on in January, so they would have that, or they could still make the corrections online. Just because you completed a paper FAFSA does not mean that you cannot make corrections online. Or students can contact the college that they're attending, and once they go through whatever issues need to be addressed with their financial aid administrator, the financial aid office can make those changes on behalf of the student. With verification, I know that's where some of our students might be going to next. The department did share that there's no changes to the verification documents or what is considered acceptable documentation. There is no, in case anyone's wondering, there's no word yet on any like mass changes to waive verification or anything like that for anybody. But they have indicated that because of the way that application is set up, there is a significant reduction in verification this year. So even just flagging students, it's not super common because again, a lot of this is getting transferred directly from the IRS and because consent is required for that. And then contributors who do have to manually enter tax information will be able to request copies of their tax return transcripts like we did in previous years to submit to those schools. But I know, as unfortunate as that is, that continues to affect our families whose parents don't have socials, right? Because they don't have socials, the system's not going to manually or is not going to automatically transfer in their tax information from the IRS. So they have to manually enter that tax data. So that means that they will be flagged for verification and they will have to submit tax return transcripts to the school. So if you have students in that situation, that's one thing that you can be doing now before the end of the year. Work with them on requesting that tax return transcript, because there's the chance they could get it online if they're able to access the IRS website. There's a chance they might need to complete a paper request form and submit to the IRS. So that can also be for families, if they've never had to go through that, that can also be an overwhelming process. Like I said, documentation for this year hasn't changed for verification. You'll have a copy of this presentation. I will be sending it out. but you see this on here. For example, to verify family size, you'll need a signed statement that includes the name and age of each household member on there, and their relationship to the student. Same thing, similar to number enrolled. The only difference is that you'll also need something that shows what school that additional family member is enrolled at. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through these because I do have a couple other things to touch on, and I know we're getting a lot of questions. So please feel free to keep entering your questions, and I'll try to leave some time at the end to go over some of these verbally in case there were a couple that were, pretty common themes for folks. Now, that was verification that we talked about. There's also the professional judgment process, which I mentioned would come for students who maybe need to account for something that can't be obviously corrected or updated on the FAFSA. There's two types of professional judgment policies, and there are two categories. One is called special circumstances, and that's anything that requires an adjustment of any of the data elements in either the cost of attendance or in the student's FAFSA that then impact the SAI calculation. So in this case, it would be more so like loss of income, or maybe even if parents divorce because now there's only one income in the household versus two working parents, those types of things. Anything that would have to, if you think about it this way, if a student says, hey, I have to go make a correction on the FAFSA because my parents are divorced, or because my mom lost her job, or because my dad's been laid off, if there's anything that would make you want to say, I need to correct this on the FAFSA, that's a special circumstance because you can't correct it. You have to go through this process. If there's an unusual circumstance, that specifically relates to a student who needs a dependency override based on a unique situation. So unusual circumstances are specifically for dependency related issues. As of this year, schools can no longer maintain a policy of denying all professional judgment requests. So they do have to have some sort of policy in place to allow students to submit a request for professional judgment or appeal. And schools are required to have a list that says these are what we consider adequate documentation for fulfilling this professional judgment request, or to provide along with your request, right? Like if you're telling me mom lost her income, then this is what you can submit. Maybe a letter from an employer, maybe a statement from the parent. It really depends on the school, but they do have to have a list that lets students know that that's what's required. So a little bit more on the difference. Like I said, unusual circumstances relates more to dependency issues, special circumstances to data elements on the FAFSA. So unusual circumstances would include students who might be victims of human trafficking, students who have been granted refugee or asylum status who are here without a parent and might need a dependency override for some additional reason other than like my parents just didn't want to provide information, right? Like there has to still be a legitimate reason for that. For example, parental abandonment or estrangement, or student or parental incarceration, versus special circumstances would be loss of employment or assets, reduction in income, potentially tuition expenses at an elementary or secondary school for another child, right? Like if a parent is paying for another child's tuition, then potentially that could be considered a special circumstance. And then unusual medical or dental expenses not covered by insurance. So if the family has an unusually high out-of-pocket expense for dental or medical issues, then they could potentially petition the school to consider that as part of a professional judgment request, because it's not a yearly thing, but it's like a one-off thing where, okay, this happened this year, we need to account for it because it no longer accurately reflects the money that I have available for helping my student pay for college. This year, as you know by now, hopefully, there is a provisionally independent student portion that allows students who don't meet the independent student criteria but feel that they have a legitimate reason for being independent to still submit their FAFSA and then follow up with the financial aid office. It's similar to what was already in place before, but it's specifically called provisionally independent students, and there's a couple of questions that students will be asked just to make sure that they're going through the right process. In this case, students who go this route would not be required to answer information about their parents, but again, there will be a required follow-up that needs documentation with the financial aid office to ensure that they get that dependency override only if they're eligible for it. For unaccompanied homeless youth, there was an expanded list of sources that can now provide that determination for the students. Again, remember, students have to meet unaccompanied and homeless youth definitions. So homeless means that they're not living in a, they don't have a designated place to live, like a permanent stable home. Unaccompanied means that they're not living in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. So the sources that can designate that has expanded. It now also includes the last two on here. No, the last three. Well, a mix of those. The Homeless Youth Drop-In Center, program serving individuals experiencing homelessness, which is pretty similar to what's there before. It's just the name changed a little bit. And then someone who works for a program supported by federal TRIO or Gear Up grants. Those folks are now also eligible to make those determinations for that student. So on our end, I mean, and like I said, on your end too, just advocating for students, there's a couple of different things that also went into play this year that will hopefully benefit students. One of the things that changed this year was also independent students who, let's say, attend one school. Let's say I'm a student at Harper College and I've already submitted my paperwork to be an independent student, and then I'm also thinking of transferring to NIU, so I applied and NIU needs me to follow up. They can choose, so it's at their discretion, but the financial aid office at NIU could potentially say, okay, well, since you already documented all of this with Harper College, we'll take that documentation from Harper College. So schools are allowed now to just be able to accept documentation that proves that independent status from another financial aid administrator at a different institution. Students who are already independent for financial aid purposes can be considered independent for the subsequent award years only if they attend the same institution. So let's say I do end up transferring to NIU. I'm at NIU this year. I prove that I am independent for financial aid purposes. Next year, if I'm still attending NIU, I can still be independent without having to submit that additional documentation every year. So I'm hopeful that for those of you that normally have students who have to navigate the professional judgment process for dependency issues, I am hopeful that that'll be, you know, a little bit of a weight lifted off of yours and your students' shoulders moving forward. Some suggestions for navigating this process is, you know, while students are waiting on letters, or if they're waiting on parents' FSA IDs or parents to be able to provide information or decision information from colleges, acceptance letters, encourage students to gather documentation if they already know that they have an issue that needs to go through verification, or if they know that they're going to request professional judgment. I mean, even like I said, parents who had to manually enter tax data onto the FAFSA, they're going to need tax return transcripts. So help them make sure that they understand that they need to get that. For students who have to navigate the professional judgment request, let's say it's a student that's living in the shelter, before they even get to that step, it'd be helpful if they already have a letter of determination from the director designee at that shelter. So as much as we can prepare the students to think ahead, so not having to wait for that process to actually request them. I mean, I think if we can start preparing for things that the student might need beforehand, but holding on to it and not actually submitting stuff until they've been asked, right? Like not submitting more than you have to. Once a financial aid administrator has something on their desk, they are required to verify it. And if there's any conflicting information, they might have to verify further. So let's say they're asking the student for one letter of support that says that they know that they've been abandoned. I know sometimes students will try to be proactive and send like 2 or 3 just in case. If these letters have conflicting information, let's say one of them says, yeah, I know Sarah's been without her parents since she was 13, and somebody's like, well, I was aware since she was 12, and somebody's like, well, I was aware since she was 15. Well, they might say, or let's say she's been abandoned, or she was abandoned at 15, abandoned at 13, abandoned at 12. It's like, well, which one is it? Or why do they differ? Is it just these people met her at different times? Or is it like they're not sure? Are the parents really out of the picture? So those are kinds of things that could potentially trigger additional verification. There's still a number of issues that are open with the FAFSA. They continue to post these on the website. It is, I mean, on a personal, not ISAC, on a personal Sarah Espinosa professional opinion, it's very telling to have to go onto the Partner Knowledge Center and see that issues with the FAFSA are now categorized, right? Like if you have more than one category of issues on the FAFSA, there's something seriously wrong with the application, right? Like having the number of issues that we've been seeing on its own was alarming, has been alarming and frustrating. But once you categorize it, it's also like, okay, so it's not just with the form, it's with the FAFSA submission summary, it's with the corrections process, it's with the data matching, with the ICERs, right? Like, so they do have also the resolved issues on there, which luckily, you know, they've been pretty good at updating, but there's still a number of open issues on there. So if you're interested in going there and keeping up with that, you can use the link at the bottom of the page, so that you can go directly to the Knowledge Center. I do want to stress that we are here to help you around. We don't go, we're not out for the summer. We're not at school, so there is no summer break. Summer is actually one of our busiest times. That's when we train our new core members. That's when we onboard them and prepare for the following fall. So if your students need help, they can please direct them to us. They can go to the student portal and using the link at the bottom, they'd enter their zip code and they'd be presented with the core members that are closest to them. They'd also have their contact info picture, and contact info will include phone and email, and it'll also just show you what the community college district is. So they don't work at the community colleges, but that's how we divide the core members based on the different community college districts in the state. This year we added a FAFSA simplification page to be also providing our own updates on there, similar to the FAFSA issues page, but you know, trying to help families navigate and professionals navigate the information, because you know, professionals I think are bombarded with information from different sources all the time. And then on the other hand, I think all of January was super frustrating for students and families because they weren't getting anything from FSA that said these are the issues. And so families weren't sure if they were doing something wrong. And so this is a page that we put specifically together for professionals so that you could reassure your families, these are some of the things that are going on. These are some of the changes. This is what to do, or this is how to address this, right? And so we've been keeping up with that page on a weekly basis. So you should be able to find stuff on there that might be helpful for you. We also developed the FAFSA communication tool from ISAC. So it's a new resource that was put together to help practitioners communicate with families about, you know, workshops, and it includes information about best practices. There's scripts in there for English and Spanish robocalls. There's examples of language for flyers, draft emails that can be used to send to parents in English or Spanish. So, and some social media posts as well. So there's a number of useful resources in there. And so even if you don't get to use it at this point, because we're in May, I mean, I think you could still benefit from some of the stuff in there, but definitely is something that you'd want to keep present for the next, moving forward for any FAFSA cycle, is something that is free to use. You can download it. You can take it and make with it what you want. Just, you know, we're putting as much as we can out there to assist on our end as well. We'll also continue offering professional development through the spring, through the summer, back in the fall. Some of it in person, some of it virtual. We also can accommodate requests. So if you have staff that are new or have never been, like, are new to the field or are new to your institution, and this is their first time working with FAFSA directly or helping students complete the FAFSA, we can provide training. We usually ask that there's at least a group of 10, but I mean, virtually it's a little easier to accommodate, but it's still nice to have more than 10 just for, you know, for engagement, just because sometimes folks get a little bit more shy asking questions, the less people there are on there. The financial aid application completion initiative, this is what I briefly mentioned at the very beginning. This is if you are not signed up, I think most schools are, it's only a handful, but just in case, if you're not signed up for the Financial Aid Application Completion Initiative, or I might just say FCI because it's a mouthful as well. This is a way that you can log in and see completion for all of your students at your school. So we get rosters from the State Board of Ed that we preload on there. And then once we started receiving information, data from the FAFSA, from the Department of Education, we started matching that information with the rosters. And so what happens is once those data pieces are matched, using the student's name, date of birth, we're able to populate in GAP for you which students have completed a form. So I know this is, I'll try to make it a little bit bigger, but because I know this is a little bit small to see, but you'll also, again, have a copy of the presentation. I'm not sure that made that bigger for everybody, but I think so. You'll see on here, each student, it has their last name, first name, date of birth, and then their FAFSA completion status. So these say no FAFSA filed. This is just demo data. We just still covered, whatever, it could be potentially any names for students, but this is demo data that we use. So all of these have no FAFSA, but otherwise I would say FAFSA, no SAI. If the student doesn't have an SAI, remember it's an indication that either a correction or follow-up is needed. So that's also something to look for. And then on the left-hand side, you'll also see, it's a little small even for me to see. I can't remember what the first one says, but then it says opt-out form. Oh, I think it says select. An opt-out waiver. So this is for students who decided to complete the non-participation form. This year it was digital, it's electronic, it can be found on our student portal website. If a form waiver, which is not the preferred method, but if you had any students that for some reason had to complete a non-participation form, that requires manual checkoff. So the opt-out waiver that's completed through our student portal, if a student completes it, it automatically gets checked in because we also do data matching with that. But if anybody had to complete a paper form, a paper waiver, then it would appear here and you'd have to manually check that off. And then you have the good faith effort form, which we're sort of renaming the admin waiver, right? Like it's a waiver that the principal or administrator for FAFSA completion initiative can fill out on behalf of the student. Now, one of the big changes for this year, just because of the FAFSA simplification issues, is that normally you'd have to go in, check one student, enter why the student cannot complete a FAFSA or non-participation form, what efforts were put in place to help the student navigate these processes. For example, I had a school say, well, we called home 3 times, we sent an email and a letter, and we just didn't hear back from the parent, so we haven't been able to either complete a FAFSA or a waiver. They outlined that those were their good faith efforts, and then they attest at the end, right? It says I attest, they type in their name, submit it. Because there are so many issues with so many students and it's hard to enter a reasoning and efforts for every single student, right? And since most of them are going to be FAFSA simplification at this point, not all, but a lot of them, we don't want that to be an additional barrier for students to graduate. So what's going to happen is now admins can go in for admin waiver. It will be labeled as FAFSA simplification for this year. And they can check multiple students at a time. And because it's in the FAFSA simplification column, they don't have to manually enter a reason. We will know that more than likely it's because of the FAFSA simplification changes that a student did not complete a form or a waiver. So I'm hoping that'll be helpful for those of you that are still trying to navigate that process with your student. One other thing I will note is that if a principal, let's say, completes a waiver for students, that admin waiver, we also want them to direct the students to us. And I'll put the link, or I don't know if you could put the link in there, Megan, in the chat, from the one we got earlier, the isac.org/connect. But students will be directed or should be directed by the principals to go to isac.org/connect and sign up for our college Q&A, where they'll be able to get reminders, where we can connect with them, where they can reach out to us and ask questions about any processes that they might still have going on, or if they're still trying to fill out the FAFSA. they have questions about navigating that process, they can reach out to us directly. We also have the First Generation Scholars Network, which we encourage all first gen students to join. It will connect students with an FGSN mentor, which is an ISAC core member that specifically serves as an FGSN mentor. We'll help them find FGSN program or first gen programs on campus. We have FGSN check-in events and some giveaways for students. So I know we've gotten like hoodies and umbrellas and water bottles and just a number of different things to give to students to incentivize them for coming to the check-ins, right? Like for allowing them to meet with us. No, for allowing us to meet with them and to thank them for showing up and for letting us, provide any additional support. So those are ways that we also encourage students to come to the events. We have a number of things for them as well. Oh, I used the wrong button there. And just similarly to how we have the ISAC College Q&A platform for students, we also just launched our ISAC Connection, which is a text messaging service for college access practitioners. So you are all now able to send us text messages with your questions, with your anything that you need answers to, that hopefully we can, if we don't know it, we'll look it up. But you will be connected directly with someone from ISAC's professional development team. Right now, since we're getting started, we haven't had a ton of messages yet. So I've been the one answering that, but you'll typically hear from us within that business day. Might not be super instant because I know sometimes we're in meetings, trainings, presentations, but it will be a response like within that same business day. So you're welcome to text us. This is only for practitioners, right? So for anybody working with students, the students continue to have their own text messaging service, which is College Q&A. But this is new for our partners so that they can have a direct line to us at ISAC. And we'll post additional information for upcoming trainings at isac.org/PD. And if you want to join to receive any additional news updates from ISAC for ISAC programs or ISAC trainings or events coming up, please sign up for e-messaging at the link below. We also have, for those of you that might be interested, I'll include in the chat, but we have, if you go to the ISAC website, we have our Chicagoland PACE Symposium next week taking place at Elgin Community College. We still have space. If you need a fee waiver, please reach out to me or reach out to anyone on the training team directly. But we will be offering that next week, and it's to learn more about the post-secondary and career expectations framework in Illinois, and to allow partners to share best practices, interact with us to see what we're doing for PACE, and that'll take place next week on May 8th. I think that's Wednesday. So for anybody thank you so much for all of you for attending. We really would appreciate you completing an evaluation. Megan put the link in the chat. You can also use the QR code that's on the screen. Please complete it by Monday at 11:59 p.m. The form will close. If you need continuing education hours, only the evaluation is required and nothing more. For anyone requesting PD hours, those are the ones from ISB. You also have to include on that form, there will be a space for you to include that, your Illinois Educator Identification Number, so your EIN. Credit hours are awarded at the rate of 1 per contact hour, and you can access, like I said, the evaluation using the QR code that's on your screen right now, or the link that Megan put in the chat. And then this is our general inbox. I'll also put my email again up on the chat since it was on a previous slide. But please, 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 if you have questions, concerns, doubts, please reach out. We're happy to continue to support students beyond graduation. So please just, make note of those students who are still in that neither category from the beginning of the presentation, so that we have a way to connect with them and make sure that if they still need additional support or assistance with FAFSA or with any other processes, that they get that in a timely manner. Thank you all again for joining. I will look through the chat and if there's through the Q&A, to see if there were any questions. I think I'll go over some of them, but you should be able to see them on your screen. But since we have about 3 more minutes, I'll go through some of them. So if you have any students who need to complete an opt-out form, they can do so on the student portal at studentportal.isac.org. There's no www at the beginning of that, so just studentportal.isac.org, and then under programs and program applications and status checks, that's where they would find it. No, they don't. They do not need an FSA ID in order to complete a non-participation form. Non-participation forms are specific to Illinois. FSA IDs are specific to the Department of Education, and you only need FSA IDs to access any Department of Education related websites. They do need, however, a student portal account. Yeah, this one's more of a comment, but it's talking about, you know, the barrier for students is in the past they had the signature page that their parents could sign. Now they're getting all sorts of, oh, were we talking about the waiver? I think we're talking about the waiver. Yeah, the waiver, the non-participation form changed to electronic, and ISB's preferred method is the electronic. They do have the option of reaching out to them if you feel a paper form would be better suited for your students. You can message FAFSA at isb.net, and they'll walk you through the steps to get that form to your student. But they are preferring the electronic method because that allows us to automatically update that in the report in GAP, so that you can see everything in real time. Like, we update that nightly. So any students that complete a FAFSA or non-participation form electronically today, you'll see it in your GAP report tomorrow. So we can't specifically do that with paper forms, right? You'd have to manually check those off. And so that's why their preferred method is the digital option. I think that's it. The only other question that was in there was about submitting a copy of the presentation, which I mentioned I'll send via email, and we'll also post a copy of this recording on our website within the next couple days in our PD on demand webinar section. So I appreciate you all sticking around for the full hour. Thank you so much for attending, and don't forget you can text us. I'll put it back on the screen at the ISAC connection number. So if you have any questions, sometimes, you know, I know text message might be easier if we come across a question at like a FAFSA workshop or with working with a student. So whatever method works best for you is fine with us. Just please don't hesitate to reach out. All right. Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.